It's a great question because what your question gets at is organizational dynamics. And, you inferred this, but I'll say it. And that is that an effective CISO is actually building coalitions, right? That means that they're viewed as not just a central expert and a resource, but actually as a driver for dispersing risk, right? Because we know in this issue, risk is actually diffuse. You can have someone 4 layers down, click on an email and trigger a phishing scam, right? And they're as much culpable as anyone else in the organization for a widespread outage or failure. And so, yeah, I mean, in a way, right, this issue doesn't lend itself to a simple authority as the expert who can make the rules and set the limits, because the issue is much bigger than that, right? It hits everyone. So I think CISO as coalition builder is actually a way to think about leadership in this role, right? And when we think about that, it's about how do you enable and empower. And unfortunately, as I said, we've worked with a couple of companies even recently where the CISO and the head of IT are frankly, the CTO are frankly at odds, because it's almost like they're competing for those limited resources. And the reality is, in this issue, like so many issues, but particularly this issue, the board and other executives within the enterprise are incentivized to tighten those resources, right? To restrict margin, to increase revenue. And so, unfortunately, it's one of those areas that often gets short shrift. It doesn't get the attention that it deserves, until there's a crisis. And that's that asymmetry we talked about around success and failure, right?
I mean, I'm sure you've seen way more than me, but I see a fair share of reports about the role of CISOs, the burnout of CISOs, the how. I mean, it's less than 3 years the average in position. I feel like I've read in some reports. I don't know. There's a lot of these reports out there, but one of the things that I've always thought is that the difficulty most companies have comes down to leadership. And I don't mean big companies, I mean all companies, because it's very easy to come up with an idea for, I'm going to sell t-shirts on Etsy and that sort of thing. If you want to scale that, you have to be able to, not unlike an IT-backed sort of CISO has to step outside of their past into this new realm. You have to adapt to this kind of complex reality of delivering a message that people maybe think they've heard. You touched on that, and you just touched on it now, this sort of drop-in idea of like, you can't just drop in another person. There has to be an adaptive ability. Do you think it's something that a company needs to be more aggressive about, or should they be looking for CISOs that can build that coalition all on their own? You want someone really strong.
Right. Well, that's a great question, because now you're talking about fundamentally what makes effective leadership at any level, but particularly at the CISO level. And I think in an ideal world, right, all the senior level executives, including the board, they are adaptive in how they think and behave and move through systems and build coalitions. I think, at least we're really fortunate to work with some really effective CISOs. You pointed out that the burnout rate is extremely high. And so cycling back to that point for just a second, we even had a CISO, you and I talked about this in our pre-record around potential personal liability that CISOs might be under related to risk, right? And needing an indemnification from that in some cases. We talk about a crazy world where if your CISO is now personally liable for the risks and issues of a multi-billion or trillion-dollar business, I mean, this is insanity. So the stakes are high, and I do think that really effective executives are the ones, including CISOs, are the ones that are thinking diagnostically, they're thinking structurally, they're thinking about layers and engagement, including other authority dynamics within systems. Because if they don't, right, what's the risk to them and their personal success? They actually onboard this risk, this tension, and that's why the burnout is so high, because they simply can't do it by themselves, right?
Yeah. I mean, I said, so the point I sort of was getting at is just that, this idea that the leadership failures are often why things don't go right. It's not the idea, it's not the marketplace, it's the execution and the direction and clarity of goal that's set.